NBC News World Headquarters in New York. This is NBC Nightly News with Brian Williams.
Good evening. When you ask most Americans to name the single biggest issue to them these days, they say the war in Iraq. We know that because of a new NBC News poll we'll be releasing in just a moment. It also contains the president's new approval number. President Bush is well aware of public opinion. He is just back from Iraq, a 6-hour visit to Baghdad designed for maximum public impact. This morning, when the White House summoned the media to the Rose Garden for a news conference, they found a president energized and with a message he wanted to get across on the war. We will begin there tonight with our chief White House correspondent, David Gregory. David, good evening.
Good evening, Brian. They do feel a certain momentum swing around here about Iraq, but the president appeared mindful of the fact that he's boasted of turning points before in Iraq, only to have events there prove him wrong. The president is leaving tonight. Mike Gerson, who is one of the most trusted aides to President Bush going back to 1999, formerly his head speechwriter, is stepping down, saying he wants to pursue some other opportunities. He not only was so instrumental in forming Bush's words over these past 7 years, but Brian was also a key advisor putting together what Bush has called his compassionate conservative agenda.
Thanks for that, David. David Gregory at the White House for us tonight. Now for more on where the president and the issues stand right now with the American people, we have new numbers tonight from our NBC News Wall Street Journal poll. With us for more on that, our Washington bureau chief, moderator of Meet the Press, Tim Russert. And Tim, let's start with the benchmarks where we always begin.
The job approval for the president, Brian, not much change. Look at this. George Bush approval 37, disapproval 58. President's problem, 1 out of 5 Republicans still disapprove of his job performance. Let's look at Congress. Approval just 23%, disapproval 64%. Nearly 2 out of 3 Americans disapprove of the job that Congress is doing.
What are we finding driving these numbers these days?
Iraq, Iraq, Iraq. Look at this. What are the most important issues confronting the country? 53% say Iraq. Illegal immigration is second at 32%. Brian, Democrats, 2/3 say it's Iraq. And then we asked, what about the success in Iraq? Is it going to happen? More confident, 38%. Less confident, a majority, 53%. But this is a slight improvement, up from April, about 5 points. It may be related to the killing of Zarqawi. We don't know, but people are a bit more optimistic, a bit more confident, but it is not in any way a number that would be helpful to the president. And lastly, fundamental question, were we right in attacking Iraq? 41% say yes, 53% say no, and 81% of Democrats, Brian, say we were wrong to attack Iraq. That party is mobilized against this war.
Natural question becomes, any markers in here that could speak to the coming elections in November?
This is what our people told us all across the country. Who should control Congress? 38% say the Republicans. 49% say Democrats. That's an 11-point advantage for the Dems. That is up about 5 points from April. So on this generic question, it seems to indicate people prefer a change in Congress. We have a long 5 months, but that's what we see in this snapshot of the American electorate.
As they like to say, a day is a year in politics. Tim Russert will look at it all as we go on ahead. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Brian.
Now to what went on today on the ground in Iraq. Evidence of that new push to secure Baghdad still 3 years after the start of the war, designed to do just that. It is still a hot zone of insurgent violence and killing. This was the first day of yet another new crackdown now in the capital. We're joined from there tonight by NBC's Richard Engel. Richard, good evening.
Good evening, Brian. Today was just a much lower profile, and doubt he'll be making any videos, at least for now. Brian?
Thanks, Richard. NBC's Richard Engel in Baghdad tonight. We'll transition now to news on the economy tonight here at home. A highly anticipated report on consumer inflation came in higher than expected this morning. The Consumer Price Index up 0.4% last month, above what was forecast for it. What was even more troubling is that even after you strip out volatile prices like food and energy, the so-called core inflation rate was still higher than expected. Despite that, on Wall Street today, a bounce. The Dow gaining almost 111 points. NASDAQ snapped an 8-session losing streak, up 13.5. Some analysts said today the market has been spooked for weeks by inflation fears that it's now priced in another Fed interest rate hike. We get more tonight from NBC News chief financial correspondent Ann Thompson.
Once again, the high price of gasoline is fueling inflation. Up almost 5% in May and now spilling over to other parts of the economy, pushing up airfares, trucking costs, and delivery prices, fanning speculation that the Federal Reserve will raise interest rates again at the end of this month.
Confirms that there is some inflation out there, that they do have to be concerned and vigilant about fighting inflation.
All the attention on inflation and interest rates has made for a rocky time on Wall Street. Even with today's gains, the Dow's been on an ugly roller coaster ride with some breathtaking dips in the past month and potentially more bumpy days ahead.
We have a fear that the Fed may overreach or overstep and raise rates too far and actually slow the economy down more than they intend.
Proving to be too much for small investors. $7.4 billion was pulled out of stock mutual funds in the past 4 weeks, reports fund tracker AMG, as investors chose safer money market funds benefiting from rising rates.
Inflation is not just changing investors' behavior. Economists say it's also changing consumers' behavior as Americans look for small ways to get more from their dollars without drastically changing their lifestyles.
Coupons are the answer for Christine Napolitani DiBiase. She's noticed jumps in children's clothing and some grocery items. But there's one hike her budget can't manage.
I had to give up going to see my daughter and granddaughter out of state because I can't afford to fly and I can't drive there.
Consumers finding ways to make room for inflation in their budgets without busting them. Ann Thompson, NBC News, New York.
We'll take a break here, and when Nightly News continues this Wednesday night, NBC News In Depth. If you needed to go to an emergency room right now, would they be able to take you, or would you be turned away? Today we received a new and alarming report. And later, the reason everyone is suddenly talking about whether new moms should breastfeed their infants.
Huntley, David Brink, John Chen, Tom Brokaw.
Second act. Tonight, a stunning announcement from Bill Gates after his huge success